You would think of all the things, all the products, all the services that we have found in the world to manufacture, to to produce in mass and sell. I mean, it's been said that Henry Ford did not invent the car, the automobile. He just invented a process to make more of them faster. In fact, the idea of mass producing the automobile was a powerful tool that he used to say, I can control the world. And yet, the thing that he sold more than he sold automobiles was influence. See, when you have that kind of money, when you have those kind of relationships, when you can walk into the halls of power and make declaration, and because of the amount of money that you have, they pretty much have to do what you say because the amount of people that you control or lead or influence, they got to kind of follow because, well, you could take voters if they don't do what you say. And so I find that the most prolific product that's sold around the world is not a product at all. Nope, it's influence. As leaders, you should know that. Leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. The question is this: is your influence for sale? I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, and it does strike me the number of people who feel like gaining influence is a means to success. There's some truth to that. There is some truth that the more effort you put into gaining your influence, maybe it's networking, maybe it's increasing your education, maybe it's increasing the number of friends that you have around a particular business or a particular idea or philosophy or realm of thought. If you're a scientist, maybe the more you know about astrophysics, or the more you know about fossil fuels, or the more you know about wind energy, or the more you know what, all of those areas are places where you can become the expert. You can become the go-to person. But see, it's at some point, it's not the knowledge that you have in the field as much as it's your ability to articulate the knowledge that you have in the field. It's your ability to convince people how smart you are about that subject. Now, I watched the entire docuseries on Bill Gates that was on Netflix, I don't know, I guess about a year ago. And they did a great job explaining how his brain works and how his library, which obviously based on his income is much more expansive than mine, but they pointed out a couple of interesting facts about Bill Gates, the man himself. And a couple of those facts were, if he digs into a subject because it fascinates him, he never stops at the surface. He's not the guy who learns enough to quote 2 or 3 stats on a new idea like solar power or wind energy or a new software approach. That's not the way he approaches life. No, if the idea fascinates him enough to crack a book, he pores over the book. Not just the book, but every book he can get his hands on the subject. Now, it's been said, I believe the first person that I heard say it was Napoleon Hill. Maybe it's not Napoleon Hill's original quote, but it says something like this: if you were to read 4 or 5 books on any topic, compared to the average American, you're now the expert, because most people won't read 5 books on the same topic. Think about it. Go back to your college days. Even in your college courses, you probably had 1 textbook and maybe 2 or 3 other books that kind of bounced around various ideas within the field. But on one topic, one conversation, one thought process, how many people have read 5 books on that one thing? So if you're the guy who picks up 5 books on solar energy, and then 5 books on wind energy, and then 5 books on fossil fuel energy, and you've compared the 3 of them, you probably are a subject matter expert on all things energy, or at least in the way of producing and selling energy. Now, if you're the Bill Gates of that kind of thing, and you don't stop with 1 book, you read 5, 10, 15, or 20, and you pore over them, you study everything in them, now you've got some serious input. But Bill didn't stop with energy or with software. No, he went into viral technologies and population control and medicines and patents and trademarks. He made himself the subject matter expert on all of those things, which seems really bizarre because most people don't take the time to become subject matter experts on their own job. What that means for many people is that they look at someone who really does do the study, that really does do the homework, and they're like, he's a freak. Well, compared to the average person, yes, a freak, but not something wrong with them kind of freak, just an above and beyond kind of freak. See, all of my life, I've been given a hard time about being the one who still has another question. It didn't matter if it was 7th grade math class or the fire academy. I always had one more question than the professor was willing to give an answer to. I always had a little more curiosity than what they wanted to delve into at the moment. It's been the same thing in my biblical studies. It's been the same thing in my psychological studies. And it's the reason that I have my own library so that I can dig deeper and read more. My library is by no means compared to Bill Gates or somebody of that caliber, but I do study the subjects that I like to study, like leadership, communication, human psychology, sociology, relationships, because those are the things that are important to me. And yes, I guess in those areas that does make me a bit of a freak. I also do a little bit of study. When I say, I mean enough to get by study on electronics and software and things of that nature for studio production, so that I don't have to pay somebody to come in and run the cameras and do the live switching and all that kind of stuff. Oh, by the way, that reminds me, I forgot to hit that little button. Oh, looky there. See, technology. It took me 2 weeks to figure out how to do that. How to add that little lower third. See that right there? Yeah, those. My device does it on its own, but there's a set of processes that you have to go through, and then you got to get it just right. Now, I could have paid somebody hundreds of dollars to do that, but I don't want to just pay somebody to do it so that it eventually gets done. I want to be the expert on it in my own world. I want to know how to do it for myself so that I know if there's nobody there to do it, I can do it, and that I know how to do it right in case somebody else doesn't. Now, what does all that have to do with influence being for sale? See, the challenge is that across the world we find leaders who have become subject matter experts maybe on one or two things. And on those one or two things, they wield a lot of, you got it, influence. And so they can now peddle that influence. They can tell people, listen, because I know about X, Y, and Z, you should pay me to talk about X, Y, and Z, whether that's on a media format, or that's answering questions in front of Congress, or that's presenting new ideas to the legislature, or that's helping to write laws. The challenge that we find is that it's easy to be snowed. It's easy, if you haven't done the homework yourself, to trust that someone else's homework has been done thoroughly. If you've never asked the questions that they're throwing at you as answers, let that one settle in for a second. You know what happens. People throw you an answer, and you have to deal with the answer even though you've never asked the question, which means the answer really can't be questioned. I saw a meme the other day that said, I'd rather have questions that cannot be answered than answers that cannot be questioned. That is a deep philosophical statement. The challenge we have today is we have so many people who have answers that cannot be questioned. They deem themselves some subject matter experts. They have influence in a given field or industry or concept or philosophy because nobody else has studied it. Nobody else has dug as deep as they have. One example, just a tiny example, is the number of people who tell you trickle-down economics doesn't work. Well, I remember hearing trickle-down economics as a phrase since the late 80s. And I always thought, I don't know who came up with that idea. There's some philosophical aspect to it that might work. The more people have money, the more it moves down through society because they buy things which gives people jobs, et cetera, et cetera. But as an economic policy, it doesn't really exist. It's a catchphrase. It's a politically manipulative catchphrase. In fact, the economist who really does study these things, both economically and socially, who is a professor who teaches on these things and speaks on these things all over the world, his name is Thomas Sowell. And he's challenged anybody, anywhere, to show me where the first phrase, economic trickle-down politics or trickle-down economics existed. Who said it? Who was the first person that coined the phrase, and what economic policy were they talking about when they said trickle-down economics? Well, the truth is, nobody can find it. He's been challenging on that concept for 3 decades, and no one has found it yet. Why? Well, because people like to peddle their influence. It's a whole lot easier to talk around a subject that nobody else has enough depth to challenge you on. It's a whole lot easier to give answers that nobody has the knowledge to question you on, until you confront someone like a Jordan Peterson or a Thomas Sowell who has actually done the homework, someone who actually has read the same material you've read and come to a different conclusion. See, it's easy to peddle influence, to sell influence, to gain control, to manipulate. Influence is that one little bit of special ingredient that allows you to step into a room when someone's being bullied and say, it's probably not a good idea because if it came down to it, I would be on their side. That's been the relationship between the USA and Israel for decades. Not so much right now, but it has been for decades. Most people have not attacked the tiny nation of Israel, which is smaller than New Jersey, because they knew America would step in. There's a lot of power and influence. I want to challenge you as leaders. If you have influence because you have a job title, or you have a badge on your shirt, or you've been given the honor of being the manager, the leader, the boss of something, understand that your influence goes a long way. But when your influence is for sale more than the work that you do, when your influence is for sale more than the actual benefit you offer to society or to your company, when your influence is for sale more than your actual productivity, there's a word for that. It's called corruption. If your influence can be bought faster than the products and services you provide, you better ask yourself if your influence is really all they're after, because that might lead to corruption. I'm challenging you as leaders to find that place of integrity. Oh yes, be subject matter experts, absolutely. Dig into everything that fascinates you. And don't just read the first 5 pages of the table of contents. Dig in, pour through it, know what you're talking about. Read 5 or 6 books on the topic so you can know more about it than anybody else that you know. But when it comes down to what you know and who you influence, make sure it's not just your influence that's for sale. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast for Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.